Dan Rich, Curator and Director of Education at the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center. I'm very pleased to welcome our participants today from Cultural Leadership, welcome, and from the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center. Let me mention that today's program is being recorded and then will be available on our museum website. I'm very honored and pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Erika Taubner Gold. I won't say a lot about her because she's going to tell you her story. I will say she was born in Hungary. Much of her family survived, thanks especially to two righteous allies. Let me also say that, for full disclosure, Erika is my cousin, sort of. Actually, my second cousin's mother-in-law, but that's family. And also, Erika and her daughter Marilyn are both very active in the World Federation of Jewish Child Survivors of the Holocaust and Descendants. And we really, really hope, God willing, that that group is going to meet here in St. Louis in November of 2021. So without further ado, Erika Gold.
Thank you, Dan.
And if people would please, for now, put themselves on mute, we will unmute at the end when there will be time for questions.
Okay. All right. So as Dan said, I'm Erika Gold, and I was born in Budapest, Hungary. And that makes a big difference, the fact that I'm alive. And you'll find out. I have some pictures and documents that I'm gonna try to show, but because I couldn't get it on the computer, I don't know how that's gonna go. But let's try. So I usually start with a collage. I don't know if you can see it. The top row are my grandparents, and then below that is my parents' generation. Here is the first time I appear. On the bottom is here in the United States, in Cleveland, Ohio, with my family. Above that is after the Holocaust. And then there are other pictures intermingled, including a home on right here. That is my grandparents' home, and they lived in a small town called Galanta. That was about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Budapest, north of Budapest. You probably can't see it, but I have stars next to some of the names. And that means that those people were murdered in a very short period of time. I have one of these pictures in enlarged. I don't know if you can see it. This was just a little snapshot. The girl standing up, that's me. And all these other people, I'm the only one that survived this grouping, which is a very sad situation. Especially for the youngsters, I'm going to go back a little bit in history. As most people know, the Holocaust started because of Hitler came to power. He came to power in January 1933. Unfortunately, I was born like 4 months before that, which was not the best time to be born, but I had nothing to do with it. But anyway, so my whole childhood was kind of intermingled with whatever was happening in Germany. Now, Hungary was on the side of the German government. Our military held their military, so they kind of left us alone for a while because they needed the cooperation. But things first just happened in Germany. As soon as Hitler came into power, the Jews lost their citizenship, they lost their jobs, their professions. Anybody who worked in the government were kicked out, or the military, universities, many places they were kicked out and they couldn't work. On stores, they put on big signs, Mogen David signs, meaning that those are Jewish stores and people should boycott that. So that's how it started. And right away, when people can't make a living, if they had the opportunity and the will at that point, they could leave the country. But most of the Germans were very loyal German citizens. They were there for centuries. They could not imagine anything terrible happening to them. So they stayed. Unfortunately, they were wrong. But anyway, and then they started gathering books and burned them. Any book that was written by a Jew or about a Jew or communists. They wanted to burn all the books. They made big fires in the middle of town. And of course, they didn't burn all the books, but it wasn't a good thing. And then, of course, you probably know that Hitler wanted everybody to be an Aryan. Now, Aryan was, if I was somewhere where I talk in person, I would ask most of the kids if they know what an Aryan looks like. But most people know they had to be blonde hair, blue eyes, tall, handsome. So not unfortunately, I don't care, but Hitler wasn't. So if he would have looked in the mirror, he could have committed suicide and I wouldn't have to talk to you. But that didn't happen. In 1934, there was a contest. They asked all the professional photographers to send in their most Aryan-looking baby picture. And I happen to have a copy of it. I don't know if you can see it. She's kind of cute. And she won the most Aryan baby, being the most Aryan-looking baby. Unfortunately for them, she was Jewish, but they never found that out. I don't know if anybody saw it, but a few years ago, she was actually on television. They had a program about her. She was still alive then. And so she, they never found out. But anyway, so that was in Germany. Then in 1938, Germany annexed Austria, which was not a big deal. The language was the same. Hitler actually was born in Austria, so they just marched in. And if anybody saw The Sound of Music, which is a beautiful musical, it's a very good history of the annexation of Austria. But then a lot of things happened. They picked up people from the street, and but it was still, most people didn't know it. Although we had a lot of propaganda that people were, we had it in the news and in the newspapers. So my parents were listening to the Radio Free Europe, because that was the only real news that they could get. And it was against the law, of course. And I was taught to be very quiet and not to tell anybody. So I figured that wasn't a good thing. But I listened. Anyway, at that point, I heard Hitler on the radio. He was always shouting, and you didn't have to understand German in order to know that whatever he was saying, it wasn't good. So that's how I grew up. So then after the annexation of Austria and part of Czechoslovakia, which was in March 1938, in November in 1938 was Kristallnacht, when they went around and threw stones and bricks into Jewish homes, windows and stores and synagogues and burned them. And the fire department was standing there making sure the other buildings don't catch on fire. That was really bad. And they took people away immediately. Some they killed on the spot. Other people, mostly men, were taken to concentration camps. They had the women go down to the street and they had to clean the sidewalks with toothbrushes on their hands and knees, which was really demeaning. And at that point, they realized that things are not getting better, and if they can get out, they should. So a lot of people left at that point, but of course not everybody. And it was very difficult to get anywhere because the quota systems were very small, especially in the United States. But anyway, so after Kristallnacht, September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and that actually started the Second World War in Europe. And then they took over one country after the other, and they did sort of the same thing. So they gathered the Jews, they either killed them outright, or they put them in concentration camps and ghettos. So that was, every one of those things were very bad. And then in 1942, they realized that it's very hard on the German soldiers to be killing people one by one. So they had to have a better way of getting rid of people. So there was a Wannsee conference. It was a little town next to Berlin where all the top Nazis met, and they decided on the final solution. And of course, as we know now, which we didn't know at that time, it was the gas chambers and the crematorium. And that way they could gas hundreds and thousands of people in a very short period of time, and they didn't have to see them one by one. So that helped the German army. So most of this we did not know. Although I know that my dad had a clerk in his store who was born in Poland, and when Poland was invaded by Germany, the Hungarian government sent all the people back to Poland or wherever else they came from. But so I don't know. I mean, it was a bad situation, but she did go, and we never heard from her again. So I figured that wasn't a good thing. So after that, we heard rumors from Czechoslovakia. People were trying to escape and come to Hungary because we were still okay. We had relatives in Czechoslovakia, but we knew people were disappearing, but we did not know what was happening to them. So then in 1944, already the Russians were going west, trying to beat the Germans, and they were very close to Hungary. So the Hungarian government, I understand, were afraid that they'd be taken over by the Russians, and they didn't want that to happen to them. So they tried to make peace with the Allies. Of course, Hitler found out immediately, and they occupied Hungary immediately. And that was on the 19th of March, 1944. And what the Germans did in in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary in less than 2 months, which is impossible, you say. But besides the fact that I was there, although I was young, was only 11 at the time, it was proven. Because I don't know if you know, I live in outskirts of Cleveland, Beechwood, Ohio, and we have a Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. And we have some of the Holocaust museums traveling exhibits come to Cleveland. And this time we had Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the architects of the final solution. He was the one who was in charge of the transports in Hungary. And he was very good at what he was doing. So at the exhibit, we had a little plaque that said, it complimented him on his accomplishments, that he was able to transport 400,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz in less than 2 months. So I didn't say it, they did. It was the German government that he got that award on November 1944. So that's exactly what happened. So when after the Germans occupied Hungary, as I said, everything went very fast. They arrived on the 19th of March. By the 1st of April, we all had to wear a yellow star. And I don't know how, it had to be a certain size, a certain shape, certain way of making it, but we all had it. We had to have it on the clothes if we walked outside. It had to be sewn on, not pinned on. So that was a big deal, but as I said, I don't know how, but we all had it. Nobody could go out without. Right after that, a law came out that non-Jewish people could not work for Jews. Also, that was, we had a housekeeper at our apartment. She had to leave because she wasn't Jewish. And my dad had a clerk in the store who wasn't Jewish. He had to leave. But there it didn't make any difference because he had to close the store and report to a forced labor camp. And I happened to have that paper. I'm one of the lucky ones who actually have papers. So this is the paper, and most people will recognize the emblem. It's Shell Oil. They had a refinery near Budapest, and that's where my dad was. At the same time, in the beginning of April, my grandfather, who lived in the small town Galanta, sent a message that they have to move out because a German officer needs his house. But he said, so they moved in with another family member, and as long as they leave a roof over our heads, we'll be okay. So everybody was always very optimistic, and they looked for the silver lining, I guess. They thought it's coming. But anyway, then we didn't hear from them for a long time. We had no idea if they had a ghetto or they had to move again. I have no idea. In June, we got a message from him that they're going to be taken out of town. And of course, as we know now, all the Hungarians at that point were taken to Auschwitz. And they were not taken in trains. It was cattle car. And the older I get, the angrier I get that nobody objected to it. The people in the towns did not feel that it was not right to put 80 to 120 people in a cattle car. be there for days without any food and hardly any air, but nobody said anything. And that's one of the reasons we talk, especially to youngsters, to make sure if you see something that is so wrong, you have to speak up. But these people didn't speak up. And I guess, I don't know the exact quote that that was told by, Rizal. He said that he blames the bystanders more than any of the other people who were part of the Holocaust, because they just kept quiet. But anyway, so nobody objected to it. By July 1st, all the small towns and villages in Hungary was cleared out of Jews. There wasn't one anywhere. The only Jews left over were in Budapest. Because it was a bigger town, it was probably harder to get us together. But then I just lately found out there might have been another reason, because 2 guys escaped from Auschwitz and were telling people what was happening there. And it finally got to the Hungarian leader, Horthy, and he stopped the deportations. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but that's one idea. Anyway, but instead of deporting us out of town, they put us together somehow. They decided on certain buildings where Jews can live, and others was off limits. Unfortunately, the building we lived in was off limits, but my mother had an aunt whose building was approved for Jews. So we moved in there with them. At that point, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a whole family, not a person, a whole family. And if you had a dining room, 1 bedroom, a kitchen and a bath, that was considered as 4 rooms. So 4 whole families had to occupy that space. So that was very crowded, but at least we were related, so it was a little easier than if we were total strangers. So we lived there, and at that point, we could only go out on the street 2 hours a day. I think it was 8 to 10 in the morning, and just to go and buy the most important food items like fruits and vegetables. First of all, it was plentiful, excuse me, plentiful during the summer, and that was the only food that Jews were allowed to buy. Couldn't buy meat or flour or sugar or dairy products. I received 2 ounces of milk a week because I was under the age of 12. So that was my only nourishment. So my mother took me every day to the market, and we bought fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's what we lived on. And otherwise it was very boring. And now that we're having this virus and everybody's locked in, I realized more, because of the fact that at that point, nobody talked to the kids. Nobody explained what was happening. We were just there, but we had no idea what's coming next. There was no education. Now, teachers actually Zoomed with kids, which was great. And it made life probably easier for them. But anyway, I was very bored there. And this one day I was going to rebel. I don't know who I was going to rebel against. But I took off my yellow star. Of course, I didn't tell anybody. I knew there was a pastry shop 2 buildings down from where we lived. And in the middle of the afternoon, when I shouldn't have been on the street anyway, I went there and I bought myself an ice cream cone. As I'm eating the ice cream cone, I realized that if somebody recognized recognizes me, I could be shot on the spot. So it wasn't my best idea. But on the way home, since I did not get killed, I promised myself never ever to do that again. And the only reason I'm saying this, especially to the youngsters who are there, that the situation was so bad that I would take a chance like that, because it was so boring. I mean, now at least we have television and computers. But anyway, so at that point, nobody ever found out that I did that. So after that, I just followed the rules, and on 15th of October, realizing that we are still alive, some of the Nazis, the Arrow Cross took over the government, they kicked Horthy out, and they were going to get rid of us much faster. So by that time, most of the men of working age were already in a camp, either a concentration camp, work camp, or attached to the army. So they were not in town. So there were only old people, children, and women. So at that point, the Nazis called all the women of working age to report to this big sporting arena. My mother was part of the group, she had to go. And the Nazis had absolutely no idea how many people are going to show up. And because of the fact that they had to have everybody registered. See, most of the things that we know is from the German government, because they wrote everything down. They were very accurate in what they were doing. They wanted to make sure that everybody knows what they were doing. So everybody had to have a paper. And it took them a long time to register everybody. Now, I happen to have a paper. This is about my uncle that you can see. It's a nicely handwritten, very exact, a lot of information on it. I know you couldn't read it, but it has his name, his birth date, where he was from, where they were taking him, and the number of the transport and the date, so everything, and it was very nicely handwritten. So everybody had to have a paper. So when my mother was in this sporting arena, at the end of the day, the Nazis said, anybody who is not registered can go home and they'll be called another time. Fortunately, my mother wasn't registered, so she was able to come home, but she right away said she's not going to back there when they call. So she wanted to figure out some other way of saving our lives. So she found out that there was a factory near Budapest that was making soldier uniforms. And if we get in there, they'll save us because that's important for the war effort. So we got in there, and I went with her, and we stayed there. We never went outside. We just worked during the day, and at night we slept on the factory floor on the soldier uniforms. So that's how we existed there. And I have that paper too. And this is it. The only thing that's important about this paper is the fact that it was given to us the 14th of November, 1944. While we were there, my dad sent a message and that they're going to be taken out of town. They never knew where they were going. They were just going somewhere. At that point, my mother found out that there were neutral country diplomats in Budapest, one from Sweden, Raoul Wallenberg, and one from Switzerland, Karl Lutz. And they were giving out protective papers. My mother was able to get one for my dad. It was sent to him, and I have that too. the Schutzpass from the Swiss government, from Mr. Lutz. And I understand. Mr. Lutz lived in St. Louis for a while, so you have a connection. But I don't have time to go into that. But anyway, they were giving out protective papers. It didn't always work, but as I said, it was sent to my dad. We did not know if he got it and whether or not it did any good. All we knew that it was sent to him. And at this point, I want to just mention the fact that these diplomats did not talk about it because their own government did not want to have them save the Jews, obviously. And even in Mr. Lutz, when he went back home, nobody thanked him, nobody acknowledged him. After he was dead 20 years was the first time they gave some credit for him, for what he did. So that was very, very bad. So none of the diplomats, there were a lot of diplomats all over Europe who were doing the same thing, but they did not talk about it because they didn't want to lose their jobs. There was even an American one in Marseille, but anyway, they didn't talk about it. The only time we found out about these diplomats, either when they were very, very old and started talking, or after they passed away, the family found the papers. In 2005, there was a big exhibit in Cleveland in the public library called Visas for Life. And by that time, they recognized over 100 of these diplomats. And they had a big exhibit it was there for quite a few weeks, that it was very interesting. And as I said, it was documented. Of course, the Israeli Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, did acknowledge him and gave him credit for what he did and honored him, but the rest of the world didn't know about him. So, okay, so we're still in the factory. And as I mentioned, we were working in the factory we got the paper on the 14th of November. The 1st of December, the Nazis came and took us all away. Some of us were on trucks, other people were walking, of course, not knowing where we're gonna end up. And at the end of the day, we arrived this very busy marketplace. It was a Friday afternoon, it was getting dusk. We arrived in this, as I said, very busy marketplace. People were doing their weekend shopping. The Nazis said, we're going to stop here. Nobody should get out of line or get off the trucks. With that, the truck that my mother and I were on stopped. She jumped off. She winked at me. I jumped after her, and we walked away. Obviously, nobody saw us. Now, there was another thing that happened that I unfortunately never asked my mother how this happened. But as I mentioned, we didn't have to wear a yellow star till April 1st. And by that time, the weather was getting nice and we didn't need our winter coat. So our winter coat did not have a yellow star on it. But in December, we needed the winter coat. So we had the winter coat without the yellow star, but in order to be legal and have the star, we put the raincoats on top of it, and that way we were okay. But on this very busy marketplace, as we were walking, we dropped the raincoats, and that way we were not as visible. By that time, we knew where our housekeeper lived with her daughter, who was my age. Her name was Ilonka Takács, and we had a very good relationship with her, fortunately. And we went there, and my mother asked if we could come in a couple of days to see when she figures out what else we can do. Of course, there was nothing else to do. And as I mentioned, she was very nice. And I mean, it was more than nice that she let us go in, because her life depended on it, and her daughters. If anybody would have ever found out that we were there, all four of us would have been killed. So it was it was really a very gracious thing and heroic thing for her to let us go in. And there was nowhere to go. She used to have her sister just drop in, and then we had to hide. We either went under the beds or a small closet in the kitchen, and we had to be there motionless until she left. So it wasn't easy, and it was very scary. Every day we could have gotten killed. But fortunately, on the 15th of January, the Russians came in and liberated us, which was amazing. But we didn't go out because we didn't know what was going on the street. And then a miracle happened 3 days later. My dad came and found us, which very few families were stayed intact like that. So we were very, very lucky. Then we found out that Schutzpass from the Swiss government got to him. The Nazi got it. He was actually in the train already, and the Nazi let him go. And then by that time, there was a ghetto in Budapest, and that's where he stayed the remaining time. So we were, at that point, we could go out on the street. By the way, the 3 days difference between the ghetto and where we were, I could walk it today, it was that close. But it took the Russian army 3 whole days to liberate that section, so the whole town of Pest. It was just, Budapest is made out of 2 cities. The Pest is on the east side, that's where the Russians were coming from. The Germans blew up all the bridges on the Danube, so the Russians couldn't cross, and it took them another 30 days before they were able to liberate the Buda side. But we were able to go around the city and do whatever we wanted within reason. So we tried to go back to our apartment, and because of the fact that it was the top floor of a big apartment building, nobody wanted to live there because all the bombings and the air raids. So nobody went in there, nobody touched anything. So we could just go back home, and whatever we left there was there. The only problem was it was the middle of January and all the windows were broken. That's from the bombings. But fortunately, we forgot to close one window. It happened to be in the bathroom. So my parents pulled in one of these pull-out couches. They slept on that, and I slept in the bathtub. We had no food, no running water, no gas, no electricity, but we were free. And when you're free, then things happen and things get better, and the weather was better and people were getting back to work. And as the Russians were going west, liberating the different cities and countries, including the concentration camps, and of course the Allies doing the same thing, when the concentration camps got liberated and the people started coming back, is when we actually found out all the horrible, horrible things that happened there, and then all the people that we can't expect that they would come back. So that was very sad. And I'm going to finish in a few minutes, but I just want to say, we wanted to come to the United States even earlier. I think in 1936, my parents asked for a permit to come to the United States. And because of the small number of people that the United States lets in each year, even after the Holocaust, which was 9 years later, our number wasn't even close. So in 1948, my father found out that the Cuban government is selling visas. And if he buys us visas, we'll be able to get out of Europe and closer to the United States. So that's what we did. In May 1948, we went to Cuba. Then it took another 2 years before we got to the United States. And of course, by that time, I had a lot of holes in my education. So the most important thing for me was to learn English and get back to school. So in 1950, in September, I got into high school. I graduated in 1952, and then I was able to go to Case Western Reserve University. 1956, I became a medical technologist. I got married the same year. We have two children, 4 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild that's brand new. So I'm gonna stop here, and if you have anybody has I wanna say one more thing for the youngsters. I don't know how many youngsters there are, but to make sure that you take advantage of the education, because that's the only thing that is really yours. Everything else can be taken away, and I don't mean, God forbid, another Holocaust. There are fires, there are floods, things get disappear, get ruined, get stolen, whatever is in your head, that is yours and nobody can take it away from you. Thank you. Okay, I'm ready for questions.
Hi, Erika. My name is Megan. I'm a docent at the Holocaust Museum. First, I want to thank you for putting this quarantine kind of in perspective, talking about your experience.
It's actually easier.
Yeah, in the ghettos, we think we have it bad right now, but I have a couple of questions. First, sure. What were the big differences between the experience of the Hungarian Jews and then the Jews in other parts of Europe? And you also talked about bystanders. And I want to know if you have any advice on how we can, remove ourselves from the role of a bystander and be advocates and activists, particularly in this time of protests. Do you have any advice on that for us?
Actually, I didn't mention that the fact that when Germany started the Holocaust, we were not involved, but there was definite anti-Semitism in Hungary way before. There was quota system in the schools, universities, the Jews couldn't go to medical school, law school, or engineering. So there was definite anti-Semitism, which was very strong, but it was not from the government, which made the difference between Germany and Hungary. And about the bystander, I wish I could tell you what to do, because it seems like most people just sit by. Now we're trying to teach the youngsters, at least, to stand up and if they see something wrong. It works sometimes, it doesn't work. Now we can see with all the protests, so maybe it's working. But it's very important not to let things slip by and say that it's none of my business.
Okay, thank you very much.
Erika, this is Nancy. My husband and I first became aware of the ongoing anti-Semitism in Hungary when we visited Budapest a few years ago, and we're it's kind of jarring to hear their version of history.
Yes.
Which is how it was really all the Arrow Brigade killed people and not the Nazis and
Right. Yeah.
whatever. How do you feel about? And I think it's gotten worse since then. Holocaust denial has grown, and anti-Semitism has grown. How do you feel about what's happening in Hungary today? And what can anybody do about it, especially half a world away?
Unfortunately, it's not good, and and the president is anti-Semitic and anti-everything else. But I don't know if anybody can do anything about it unless those people leave. I don't know how easy it is to leave, and it's always difficult to leave your country. I mean, it wasn't easy when we left. For me, it was easy because I didn't remember they called it the good old days, because I didn't have any of those. Although I was sheltered as long as I could be, but it's bad because they're not telling the truth, and I don't know. I feel bad for them. I feel really bad for anybody who was there. I have one cousin who's left there, and she's 93. So, but she's the only relative I have there. But she seems she's okay.
Thank you. It's just a shame that nothing's changed really in all these decades.
Yeah, it's getting worse. It's definitely getting worse.
Thank you.
Do any of our friends from cultural leadership have questions?
Yeah, my name is Maya. I just had a question about, like, with all the traumas and just crazy stuff you experienced during the Holocaust, how did that affect your life after it?
I mean, it does. I'm trying to, I married somebody who was not a Holocaust survivor. He was born here in Cleveland, so he was born in the United States. So I wasn't always with Holocaust survivors like some. I was old enough to know what was happening, but young enough that I had no input. And I tried to make a normal life for my kids, and they tell me that I did an okay job. But it comes back. Anything brings it back right away. I don't have to talk about it. It comes back. No matter what I'm thinking about, in 2 minutes, the Holocaust is right there. So it's on the outside, I'm doing the best I can, but it's not, I can't forget it.
Thank you.
I have a question. My name's Sophia.
Hi.
If there is like a piece of advice or something you would change if you could go back in time, would you?
Me? See, at that point, I could not have made, because I was only 11. So I could not change anything except if I could have left sooner, but it wasn't a choice. For people who were older, like my parents, it must have been a very hard decision to leave everything and everybody there. So it wasn't an easy decision for the people who left, but that would have been the answer if people would have left earlier.
Hi, this is Barb Hoffman speaking. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Couple questions, just to clarify. Number one, was your father able to maintain his business, continue to own his business till the Germans took over the government? That's number one. And number two, during the war, before the Germans took over versus after the Germans took over, did you personally experience any change in the way perhaps your non-Jewish friends treated you?
I'll start with the last question. No, because as I mentioned, there was a quota system in the schools. So when it was time for me to go to school, my parents signed me up in a Jewish day school. And in that case, I did not have a problem. I did not feel any problem before the Nazis came in. I could go wherever I wanted to go or do whatever I wanted to do. But that was because I was underage. There was something else you asked me. I forgot. I'm sorry.
I asked if your father was able to continue to own his store just the same.
Up to the minute when he had to close it in 1944 in April, he was able to have his business. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Can I? Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, hi, Erika. I'm Debbie Goldenberg. I'm also a docent at the St. Louis Holocaust Museum and Learning Center. So I was also in Hungary a few years ago, and they had a lot of posters of George Soros all over the place. They identify him as the Jew that's trying to take over, and he has all the funds. So when you were growing up, was the anti-Semitism because they thought the Jews were controlling everything? Because anti-Semitism can have a lot of different characteristics. Sometimes Jews have been accused of being communists, and then they're accused of, all these stereotypes.
I think most of the people don't identify why they're anti-Semitic. They just are.
Okay.
So it's all of that above, all the above. And if you I haven't asked anybody, but if you would ask an anti-Semite, they probably wouldn't know what the cause is. They just don't like us. I don't know why. I never could figure it out because I was always a nice person. So it makes no sense.
There's never a correct reason to hate a group. It all starts with stereotypes, but I was just wondering if there was a certain characteristic that you noticed specifically in Hungary.
No, but there was one year when, since I went to a Jewish school, we had to share our school with another school. So in order to have two separate schools in one building, some of us went in the morning and some in the afternoon in the same classrooms. And when it was time for our class to go on Friday afternoon, and because of the religion, Shabbat coming in early in the winter, we couldn't go to school. So those people went on Sunday, and I was always afraid to go, that somebody will know if I go to school on Sunday that I'm Jewish. But fortunately, nothing happened. I always got there and nobody said anything. So maybe I was just fortunate.
And the other thing that I saw on our trip was that the ghetto, they were going to knock down all the buildings. It's actually turned into where young people go bar hopping in Hungary.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes. We saw that, and they have like a little plaque that says it was the Jewish ghetto. But so there was mixed feelings by some of the Jewish people who saw that. They thought, well, it would have been all knocked down and there wouldn't even be a plaque remembering it. Yeah. However, being these like bars that had like all these recycled materials was kind of weird, because that was the ghetto. And that's what they—
Were you there?
Pardon?
When were you there?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
But the most moving part is the shoes, I thought, on the bank, where they said they didn't want to waste bullets, and they would use one, they would tie people together. And
yeah,
use
3 people. Yeah.
Did you see that?
I actually met 2 guys who escaped, which is, they were a little older, and they must have been good swimmers. They were shot in the Danube. And I guess the way they were shot, they didn't get hurt that badly. And they just stayed in the water long enough for the Nazis to leave. And then they were able to climb out. Of course, I don't know, when you see 2 young guys naked in December, what you think of it, but obviously they were able to find a safe place and survived.
Thank you.
So that was a real thing, that was not made up.
Erika.
I think we have time for maybe another question. Okay, great.
Erika, hi.
Hi.
I'm Kathleen Sitzer. First of all, and I'm a new docent. And first of all, I want to thank you for giving your time today. It was wonderful to hear your story. We were also in Budapest, but much longer ago than some of these recent visitors. We were there about 18 years ago, and it was, I think, very shortly after the opening of the House of Terror Museum. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. And the thing that struck me, and since you were there post World War II for a few years, you could speak to this. According to that museum, it seemed to be even worse under the communist occupation. So would you talk about that?
That was because most of the Hungarians want to not even talk about the Holocaust, because they want to say they had nothing to do with it. But they lived through the communists, and that's what they're emphasizing. That is one building. I went back 3 times after we immigrated, and that was the only building I could not go in. The last time we were there was in 2014, and my granddaughter was 13. I took her. She wanted to go in there, and I said, no, I cannot go in there. That was because of Hannah Senesh was in there being tortured. So the Nazis were torturing people, and then the communists were torturing people. And what I can't understand, many of those torturers were the same people. Because when the Russians came in, they turned Colts. All of a sudden they became communists, which means that they have absolutely no sense of decency.
So you would say that it was equally bad under both, but that the Nazis were worse.
No, the Nazis were much worse than the communists. I mean, the communists were probably not good. That's why we left when we left, because they were taking things away, but they did not kill people by the thousands and millions.
And by the way, my grandparents were Hungarian, but they came over at the turn of the century.
Oh, that was a good time to go.
They lived in a part of Hungary that has gone back and forth in eastern Hungary, in a town called Munkacs.
Oh, Munkacs, yeah. I'm just reading a book that a lady wrote. I just have it right here. Maybe you want to read it. It's a world after this. And it's, I just started, but it's a lady that was between Russia, Poland and Hungary, and they were going back and forth, and she lived in Munkacs.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Erika, and thank everyone for joining us. I do have a connection with Erika. If you think of other questions that you want to ask her, I will make sure that she gets them and responds to them.